really excited to turn our attention to the tenant side of the equation in New York right now. And we welcome all of you from very exciting companies to tell all about your experience. So I'd like to introduce John Pennant, who's a partner at EisnerAmper and who will moderate our next panel.
Thanks, Nancy. Good morning, everyone. Looking forward to continuing the session today. So our session is going to really focus on a couple of New York City success stories. And we've put together a couple of companies here that are going to share their stories as to how they were able to propel forward and the portion that New York City helped to put together in their success stories. So I'm going to ask each of our panelists just to take a couple of moments to introduce themselves. So Shara, would you please start off?
Sure. Thanks, John. I am Shara Tiku, and I am one of the co-founders and CEO of Z16 Biosciences.
Terrific. James?
How's that? A little bit better?
Yes.
A Zoom faux pas in the middle of the beginning of the panel. That's not good. James McCullough, Chief Executive Officer of Renalytics AI. We have laboratory space down on Canal Street and foundational partner with Mount Sinai Health System. And we've just launched our lead product, Kidney Intellect, which is a first-in-class product. We call it an artificial intelligence-enabled in vitro diagnostic. And it's focused on identifying who has kidney disease that matters and who doesn't, especially early. Good to be here.
Perfect. Thank you, James. And Gaurav, would you finish that portion of this off there?
All right, thanks. Thanks, John, Nancy, for having us here. Looking forward to it. I'm Gaurav Shah. I'm CEO of Rocket Pharmaceuticals. We're a gene therapy company, one of the few that are cropping up in New York City. We're very excited to be a part of this ecosystem, I think, drawing from some of the academic talent as well as the general local regional talent here has been a great experience for us. We're really focused on gene therapies for rare, devastating pediatric disorders, and we're about 5 years old. So, thanks for having us.
Terrific. And as Nancy mentioned, I'm John Pennant. I head the Technology and Life Sciences practice at EisnerAmper, and we're pleased to be a part of the organization and to contribute to this particular symposium. So maybe I'll ask each of the three of you to describe a little bit about the start of your company. How did the company get started? Where did the science come from? And if you could take a couple minutes, Shara, we'll start with you again.
Great. And I didn't really explain what my company does, so I will also do that.
Yeah, please.
So Z16 Biosciences, we make safe, clean, bio-based alternatives to palm oil. Palm oil is the most popular vegetable oil in the world, and it's found in 50% of products on supermarket shelves, and everything from soaps and shampoo to makeup and food like Nutella and frozen pizza. So you might sort of think, like, what does palm oil have to do with biotech? And that's kind of the core of what we do. Is I think biotech doesn't have to mean drug discovery, and it actually doesn't have to mean healthcare. And so what we do is we use some of the long established tools of biotechnology to solve consumer problems. How did the company get started? Two things. One, my co-founders and I saw a problem that we really wanted to solve, and that's the palm oil problem, which I'll talk about in a minute. And the second is that we saw sort of evidence that we could perhaps use biotechnology to solve this problem. My co-founders and I met at the MIT Media Lab about 4 years ago. We were all at Harvard and MIT studying different things. But we met about the time that Impossible Foods had launched their very first burger just up the street at Momofuku Nishi. And we were really excited about this because it was the first time we were seeing engineered biology solve a very consumer-facing problem, right? Making a delicious burger that doesn't come from meat or from animals. And so we asked, could we use similar technology to solve the palm oil problem. So as I mentioned, palm oil is ubiquitous. It's a $60 billion industry and it's found in everything. The problem is really in the way that it's made. The industry is dependent on massive scale destruction of rainforests, and it results in about 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions each year as growers slash and burn tropical rainforests, all to make this little vegetable oil. So what we do is we use microbiology to make a bio-based palm oil alternative. The space is sort of referred to as, industrial biotech is what it was called back in the day when people were making chemicals and biofuels. We like to call it consumer biotech because we're really focused on solving problems and making products for consumers, but we're using biotechnology as the toolkit to solve it. So that's the basis of what we do. We use microbes, we use yeast in particular that can make an oil that looks and functions just like palm oil. We engineer the yeast, so we need sort of biology space, traditional wet lab space to be able to do that. Then we grow up the yeast in bioreactors. So we need a sort of dedicated space for sort of 2-liter bioreactors. And then we have to pull out the oil and we do a bit of prototyping work. So it also means that we might be doing some hardcore chemistry with solvents, et cetera. So we do look a little bit different than traditional drug development companies. Our lab needs look different than traditional drug development companies. We need a much bigger square footage. We are currently looking to grow in a space that's 15 to 20,000 square feet. And we're less than 20 people. So we need big space. We need space that can do lots of things, everything from biology to chemistry. But really, we believe that biology can help usher in a new era of manufacturing that can produce really sustainable, great products for the world.
Really cool. And I know all the people on this call are particularly interested to hear about all that space needs and things like that. So that's really terrific. And obviously you can see, although 3 different types of companies, all really important technologies for us to really consider. So that's terrific. James, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how your company got started.
It's a long, circuitous route, right, for the entrepreneur, especially starting something in New York City. I see a lot of smiling and head nodding. This is actually my second diagnostic company in New York City. So I've been a New Yorker for 31 years. I got my MBA at Columbia back in a different city many years ago. And one thing that I've learned about New York is it's an incredibly innovative place. It is the medical center of the universe. So, you can get on a subway ride and you can visit multiple leading academic medical institutions. You can walk around and speak with a lot of leading financial institutions. It's an incredible place to do business. There's some downsides to New York. Space is tough and very expensive. Hiring can be difficult, especially for folks with large families. But for younger rock star scientists, we've found New York is a fabulous place to attract talent. So we pulled people in from Germany, Boston, San Francisco. It's a very vibrant place. So it was natural for me to stay here and start Renalytics, which was really a spin out of Mount Sinai Health System in kidney disease. And we built the company actually starting in early 2018. And in this case, I decided to go directly to the London Stock Exchange where we did our primary financing. So we actually listed the company on the London Stock Exchange in November of 2018. And we've just now completed a cross-Atlantic listing back here in New York City. We just listed on the NASDAQ in July for our initial public offering. So a lot of financing activity, a lot of connectivity. We've taken technology from Boston and brought it to New York. We've taken technology from Baltimore, Michigan, and then of course we pulled in financing, capital financing from Europe, London, and then back in New York. So it can all be done in New York City, which is good news. The company itself is really about looking at chronic kidney disease, which is an unsustainable problem in society today. And I'll throw out a couple of statistics, I won't take long, but 50% of the patients who end up on dialysis, which is the treatment for kidney disease, unfortunately, with so many of us are familiar, 50% of the patients that end up on dialysis do it through the emergency room, and they haven't seen a specialist in the last year or if at all. And this is a $100,000 year event. It's a life-altering event. The average survival rate on dialysis, unfortunately, is under 4 years. And through an emergency room entrance, it's not the proper way to get on a long-term sustainable treatment. So we decided to apply a lot of our expertise that we learned in oncology and cancer around precision medicine to come in and launch a diagnostic product that could really identify patients with fast progressing kidney disease or who are at high risk of kidney failure earlier on. And if you do that basic equation, now you can set up for all sorts of different treatment paths. You can slow or even stop the march to significant kidney failure. And so we've just launched this product. It's called Kidney Intellect. It does use a machine learning generated algorithm. We take a blood draw, which is very important. So we have for those familiar with it, we have a biomarker strategy. We start out by measuring 3 proteins circulating in your blood. And then we pull down up to 100 features out of your electronic health record. All of that comes together in a machine learning driven algorithm to generate a very early and accurate risk score as to where your kidney function is going. And we're pleased to have partnered with Mount Sinai. It's a major market in New York City, and we expect to expand it all across New York City and upwards into New York State as our primary launch program.
Terrific. That's great. Another terrific technology for sure. Gaurav, do you want to tell us a little bit about the formation and the start of your company? Where did your science come from, et cetera?
Yeah, sure. So I've been in New York for a while, 20 plus years, and I really do consider it my home. Sort of feel like where it's always been, and maybe where I'll always be. So we started this company in 2015. It was the seed idea, and the seed funding was by an investment group called RTW Investments, who have become very successful in the world of biotech, especially gene therapy and immuno-oncology. And it's a crossover / hedge fund group. So typically they're public investors, but once in a while, some of these groups will start a private company. And that's what they did 5 years ago with seed funding. I was hired as to come on as CEO. I was at Novartis before this. So I'd worked on CAR-19 on the CAR-T program for cancer. And so it seemed like a reasonable fit. I've known these guys for quite some time. So when they asked me, where do you want the company to be? I said, New York City. Where else, right? I mean, where else would I go? And it just seemed very natural and obvious. And I used to jog down the East River because I live near here. That's where I am now. And I used to pass the Alexandria Center. And, this biotech hub with both lab and office space. And I always imagined years ago of being in a company there, right? So essentially, we went to the Alexandria Center management, the real estate management office, and we just got a spot there that gave us both lab as well as office space, which is pretty rare. I mean, to Cher's point, it's getting a lot of space for manufacturing and lab in New York City is not easy, but they had this combined structure where it was easy not just to access combined lab office space, but be around other like-minded people and companies like ourselves. So that was great. That's how the company started. There's another element of it to piggyback off of James's point about IPO and the New York biotech market. So I was actually in 2018 also, I was at a biotech happy hour that a friend of mine puts together every month. And we were 2 years into the company running this gene therapy pipeline. I'll get back to that in a second. But another company, the biz dev person from another company came to me and asked me if I wanted a huge sum of money. And I said, in a New York spirit, I said, I hear that line all the time. If you're serious, have your CEO come to my office. I don't know why I said that, but that's what I said. It just came out that way. Next day, he was there in my office. And 6 weeks later, we did a reverse merge with them and we went public. So I think there's something about the current New York City biotech environment that spawns not just science and clinical innovation, but there's a lot of business and investment innovation going on right now as well. So we took advantage of that. In terms of academic
does the bartender get a commission on that?
Well, she's part of the company now, so
okay.
and is doing very well. She's our head of IR and strategy. So the the technology itself, the initial technology came out of other institutions, one in Spain and Seattle and UCSD. But because we're local to NYU, Columbia, Sloan Kettering, others, we've started some research collaborations in a very early stage on various programs. So we've certainly taken advantage of it. And I think in general, the New York City Biotech Hub is not new anymore, but 5 years ago, it certainly was. And I think we've just seen it change quite a bit.
Yeah, certainly from our perspective at Eisner-Amper, 5 years ago, we would be a rare, relatively rare occurrence to see a public vehicle coming out of New York City, and now it's becoming obviously quite popular. And we've been involved with several of them this year, and there's certainly more queued up to try to get to the public marketplace. So it's certainly the momentum has changed significantly. I guess that maybe brings me to my next question, which is really talking a little bit about some of the incentive packages that New York has been able to put together and whether your companies have been able to take advantage of any of those. So, Gaurav, let me start with you just to frame that up a little bit there in terms of whether you were able to take advantage of any of the New York City, New York State packages to help your company grow.
Yeah, both. So we've gotten the New York City Biotech credit for the years that it was active. The program was active, and we have also applied for the New York State Life Sciences R&D tax credit. Some of this work is still pending, but yeah, so we've taken advantage of it, and it's been very helpful, especially in the early stages, for sure.
Terrific. Shara, I know you've taken advantage of some of those as well. Could you explain what you've been able to take advantage of?
Yeah, sure. We took place in Startup New York, which I love. We don't pay city and state income taxes, which is beautiful. When I used to tell people about that, they're like, no, I don't think you've got that right. You must mean payroll. No, I mean payroll and income taxes. It's an incredible program. When we leave biolabs, we will lose it. I think that's a bummer. I think we would love to be able to continue more incentive packages like that. And for people and operating expenses, it really helps. It was a big driver. Like I said, my co-founders and I met in Boston. I had spent most of my career in New York and I wanted back here, but we met in Boston. We had $10,000. And so we made our sort of first little prototype of oil and got good feedback on it. Then we got $25,000 from Harvard. We got our first bench in Cambridge, and we hired an intern and a little bit of work. And we kept taking more steps and more steps. And finally, we raised our seed round after Y Combinator. And we said, okay, this is our company. Where do we want to build it? Boston wasn't really singing our tune. And I love Boston. It's a great town. But for a company like us, that's not drug development, that's not a certain type of life sciences company, I think we didn't really find a home. And in particular, it was very, very hard to find growth spaces. So the type of space we're looking for now, 10 to 20,000 square feet, it was almost impossible to find. We looked around, the Bay Area has lots of space, but we just didn't really want to go there. I didn't really want to live there or build my company there. And we looked at New York, and I think a lot of the incentive packages were a huge reason that I was able to get my entire team to pick up from Boston and move to New York last year. And it helps. And so they all said, yes, let's do it. We came down. Startup New York is the big one. All the tax credits that Gaurav mentioned as well. And I think New York's got a lot to offer, and we'd love to continue to see these develop as our company grows through its life cycle.
Awesome. Yeah, it's a great advantage. I'm glad you're able to take advantage of it. James, how about your company?
I'm listening to all these tax advantages. I haven't taken advantage of any of this. It's horrible. I've got to.
If you need a good tax person, let me know.
Okay, that's fair enough.
It's not bad.
What we have taken advantage of, and this is diagnostic specific, is the regulatory environment. And also the availability of local resources in New York City. So I'll bring up one example. New York State Department of Health has a very rigorous application and approval process if you want to offer diagnostic testing from patients in New York State. And that became, along with our FDA process, that became a guiding influence from the very beginning of product design, development, validation. And we knew if we could get through New York State, and we planned on that from the very beginning, it would give us national credibility, may even give us a boost with FDA, but it sets up an entire commercial program. So being local in New York State, as opposed to being out of town, trying to get through this process, which can be complex, and then also having the base of investigators and hospital systems that we're working with in New York State was a major advantage. So I think from a competitive advantage standpoint, being in New York State made a big difference. And we just announced a couple of months ago that New York State Department of Health approved us. So we're now capable of operating in all 50 states at a very high standard. That's one example. There are other examples, but certainly helpful being here.
And James, you had talked earlier about trying to find the necessary talent to help grow your business there. How have you found the experience of trying to attract people in New York, or have you brought people in from afar? Shara brought people in from afar. Have you found local people, or have you had to bring them in?
It's a mix. It is more expensive to bring families with children into New York City if they're not here. That is a barrier, no doubt. On the other side, there's a certain type of person which is very attracted to New York. I happen to be one. Sounds like all of us are, and are very interested in the vigorous cultural life and the engagement and the ability on the island of Manhattan in particular, where you have a lot of cross-sectional flow. So you have a lot of different expertises. You have a lot of people meeting. It's not like Los Angeles, where I lived for a while, where you have to get in a car and drive across town. So that type of density can be very attractive. And as Gar pointed out, can lead to all sorts of opportunities that you wouldn't get otherwise. So I think there are challenges recruiting into New York City, but there are also advantages. For example, we had two rock star, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison age scientists who are doing a high level of discovery sitting up at Mass General Hospital, and we were able to recruit them in very quickly into New York City. We've done the same with people that are in Europe. And what's interesting from the finance community, everybody wants to come to New York. So it's not difficult to get board members, investors, et cetera, to come into New York. And when it comes time for corporate social activities, which could include corporate development, employees, et cetera, assembling into New York is always a good thing to do. It's easy to attract. So I think the positives far outweigh some of the negatives in terms of recruiting.
Terrific. Well, speaking of Rockstar, I know, Gaurav, part of your hobby there is to play a little bit of music on the side there, but we'll leave that for another panel perhaps. But maybe you could talk about some of the recruiting activities that you've done and where you've been able to source some of the talent that you've brought into the organization.
Yeah, so some of the institutions mentioned today have been great sources of talent. NYU, Sinai, Columbia, I would say those three for sure. We've also made pretty good headway in attracting people who wanted to be in New York City, especially on the science, early clinical translational side. It's there's certainly a good pool of talent to draw from. I think, we're just based on the type of company we are, a lot of the later stage development talent is not necessarily going to, be New York City based. There's a lot of really good big pharma in northern New Jersey. So we have also added a footprint out there for later stage development while retaining some of the early development and also general and administrative work here, finance, legal, et cetera. So we're now mixed, but I think the first 3 years, really the first 4 years, we were solely based in New York, and it was not hard to find the right people at all.
So Shara, I know you brought a couple of your team members with you from Boston into New York, and I know you've added folks since then. Have you found them mostly locally, or did you bring them in from afar?
Yeah, same. It's been a mix. So we raised our Series A in February, which was very good timing. And we're ready to grow. The world sort of ground to a halt, but then we picked up hiring again in June. So we've grown our team 130% since February, and it's been a mix. We've had 2 people move from California during COVID to join our team. We've certainly had people join locally, both from other companies and from places like Columbia, Princeton, Rockefeller. So I think it's been good. I mean, I think hiring is hard everywhere for everybody. But people think it's going to be particularly hard in New York. I would say like the #1 piece of unsolicited advice I get or feedback is about how hard it's going to be to recruit people in New York. And it's really not that true. I mean, I think it's definitely hard, but I think I love my team. We've got an incredible team, and we found people both locally and people willing to pick up and move from California in the middle of a pandemic. So it's a challenge, but I think we've been able to build a really great team here.
I'm going to ask one last question, but if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask the panelists, if you could put them into the Q&A box there. We have a couple that were sent in advance, so we'll get to those in just a second, but please add any other questions that you may have. And while we're waiting for that, I'll just ask each of the panelists just to give us your thoughts in terms of what do you think 2021 is going to bring for you and your company. So James, you want to start off with that?
2021 is a big year for us. We've got a number of key milestones. The policy wins around diagnostic have become very favorable, especially in COVID. Diagnostics are now viewed as much more of a national priority. And we really have entered a value-based healthcare environment for diagnostics and medical devices. And that means that, you know, if you can make a health economics change, if you can make a significant outcomes change, you get paid for it versus what we used to have, which was a cost plus model. How much does it cost to run your test? Okay, we'll give you 30% on top of that. So for us, 2021 is really going to be the expression of the value-based model setting in. We expect to achieve some significant milestones, one of which could be, for example, Medicare coverage determination. We already have coding and pricing, which are 2 big milestones. We're going to be rolling out more on a national basis. We have a lot of data flow coming out around kidney disease progression, drug treatment options, et cetera. And of course, we've got other regulatory milestones. So we're looking to achieve an FDA clearance, which will be a first for the type of product, the diagnostic product that we're putting through the market. So big year for us. And obviously, New York is right at the core of that. And then, of course, just on the side, we've also launched a partnership with Mount Sinai around quantitative antibody testing for COVID. So this is really starting to look at the level of neutralizing antibodies that we have, immunity, efficacy around vaccines. This is an incredibly important area, obviously, especially now we're heading into this next wave, trying to understand factors around immune response. So very active year coming up.
Perfect. Shara, how about yourself? What are you looking forward
Sure.
to in 2021?
2021 is a big year for us. Like I mentioned, we raised our A just before COVID really exploded. And so we did slow down. We shut down the lab completely for 2 months, but we're back up. And we raised our A from Breakthrough Energy Ventures, which is a $1 billion fund started by Bill Gates. And so we operate at the heart of climate change. Climate change is incredibly urgent, and we don't have time to move slowly. So it's a big year for us. We're going to push our products into commercialization in 2021. We also just got a grant from the DOE to work together with 2 national labs, Sandia National Lab and Pacific Northwest National Lab, on some strain engineering projects. But I think the commercial is the big one. And then growing our footprint and growing our team in New York City.
Terrific. Gaurav?
So we're now in the clinic in 5 indications, 5 different rare diseases. And so this coming year is pretty major. A lot of data readouts across all 5 programs. Some of these programs are in potential registration trials with both FDA and EMA. So we're starting to build toward, with an eye toward commercial, maybe in about 2 to 3 years time. So really growing up as a company, sort of surprised, shocked, I guess, how fast it happened. So next year's a great year. And also in terms of building the team, we're going to be bilocated both New York and New Jersey. And, you know, we're going to need to probably double or triple in size in the next 2 years.
Awesome. So I know a lot of the other discussions in this symposium have talked about the impact of COVID on businesses. So maybe I'll hold off on that. And instead I'll ask this group, since we're focused a bit more on from the company side of things, about the financing markets and how you think 2021 might look in terms of expectations for trying to raise additional money, maybe not only for your own company, but maybe in the larger view of just raising money in general. So Gaurav, maybe I'll start with you on that. Just kind of what's your take on how easy or hard that may be going forward?
I think there's still a lot of capital flowing into life sciences and biotech, and certainly in New York City, for sure. I think investors are becoming selective and are going for companies that are somewhat de-risked. Yeah, Mirati just did an offering a couple of days ago, so it's very active right now, both on the strategic partnership as well as the financing side. So I don't necessarily see anything slowing down. I think there was certainly a pause in sentiment for maybe 3 to 6 months this year, but it's resumed with full force like nothing ever happened. And I think also in uncertainty, biotech seems to be a favored investment for a lot of even generalist funds, is what I'm getting a sense.
Sure. James, yeah, your thoughts?
I've been raising money a long time. I've never seen a better environment for diagnostics and medical devices. I won't comment on pharmaceuticals, but and there are alternative structures which are available for those who don't want to go the venture route. Certainly, you can take a look at interesting market access. For example, we did our first primary round for $27 million on the London Stock Exchange AIM market. And that's made up of UK and European institutional investors. So we did an all institutional round. Soup to nuts, the process took us less than 6 months. And I've been very pleased. And the beautiful thing about listing on the AIM is it's all common stock. So there's no preference, there's no drag along, tag alongs. The downside of the AIM is obviously you are now a public reporting company. Fortunately on the AIM, you only have to report every 6 months as opposed to the NASDAQ, which is quarterly. But I think it's a fabulous source of early stage financing. There are tax advantages there. And the UK and European investors love to invest in US businesses, which is certainly something we had being in New York City. It's easy access. We had Mount Sinai as a cornerstone partner. So the capital financing route right there, as far as I see, is wide open for good ideas. And if you have great data and you've got a clearly executable plan and you can define it, then alternative financing like that is available.
Perfect. Yeah, certainly been a super active year so far in the capital markets. And again, we don't see anything slowing down from our perspective. Shara, as the non-public company, how has the view looked from your side in terms of the ability to try to raise money? Or what do you expect to be going forward?
Yeah, it's looking good. Like I said, we raised just before COVID, so we feel very lucky and grateful for that. But investors are active. And I think in our space in particular, synthetic biology and consumer biotech, we're starting to see more proof points of it working at scale. Impossible Foods, so I mentioned at the beginning, is really the sort of the leader in this space. But I think we're starting to see a lot more burgeoning companies taking on different sectors of the problem in ways that can solve these problems in meaningful ways in huge markets at viable cost. and venture investors love that. So I think it's looking really good. And we are grateful to be set on cash for the next couple of years, but I think we see a lot of activity from the venture world.
Terrific. And we've certainly seen on our side of the house a lot of focus on internationalization. So whether it's offshore development or offshore markets, that's become a very important part of it, and companies setting up either development centers or business development or sales offices overseas. James, I assume in your business that would be something that you'd be looking for as time rolls on.
Yeah, unfortunately, kidney disease follows right along diabetes and obesity. So that's a global problem. Are estimated to be 850 million people worldwide with existing chronic kidney disease. And the key issue is, who do you treat? Because you can't treat them all. You've got to find out who has disease that's moving, progressing, and who you don't necessarily have to escalate. So that is a global problem, and we can speak the language of that in the United Kingdom and China, Brazil, and obviously here in the United States, it accounts for one of the single largest government medical expenditure items. So the need is very large and clear, but we can speak the language of internationalism. We do intend to deploy internationally. And obviously, having done our initial financing on the London Stock Exchange, we've got a very strong network and investor base that extends into Europe.
And Gaurav, I know you're working with some orphan diseases, so those are, agnostic to borders and geography. So I assume that you're recruiting patients into your trials from all over the globe. And how does that impact potentially how you might think about internationalization?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about rare disease is that each disease is rare, but if you add them all up, it's not rare. In fact, in New York City alone, there are probably about 1 million people living with rare disease or contending with rare disease. And so, yes, obviously we're focused on a small group of indications and diseases with high unmet need. And yes, we are pulling globally. I think on two fronts. One is, where do you establish your footprint and your presence and your domicile? And the second is, where do you draw investors in from? And we've been pretty creative on both fronts. This is a problem that speaks to both countries and investors around the world. And it's certainly across, throwing the music point, like music, it truly does cross borders and boundaries. The fight to cure rare diseases, and so it's largely an internationalized effort.
And Shara, just to kind of wrap up here as we're coming to a close of our session here. So the work you're doing is obviously has a huge international impact there, as you're helping to sustain the globe by replacing some of the destruction of natural territories there with palm oil plants and things like that. How do you see your overall expansion into the foreign markets at some point in time?
Yeah, there's definitely a piece around the heart of the problem and the markets and customers that we're serving. Ultimately, palm oil is used globally. It is produced today mostly in Southeast Asia, but the problem that we're really solving is that as the world population grows to 10 billion people by 2050, consumption of vegetable oils is actually expected to quadruple. So how do we feed the planet in a way that we don't destroy the planet? That is the core of the problem that we're trying to solve. And it is not a Western problem. We've got to think about lots of different countries and types of economies. For us specifically, as we grow, really growing our footprint comes down to thinking about manufacturing. So we do the heart of our R&D in our labs here in New York. But as we scale up, we're growing up into 200,000 liter fermentation tanks. And how do we do that in a way that's capital efficient? One of the best ways to do that is by using existing infrastructure. And that infrastructure doesn't really exist in the US, unfortunately. So as we're looking to do process development and manufacturing, many of the partners that we are turning to, really because they're our only choice, are based in Europe in particular. So I think we would love to see the development of that manufacturing infrastructure here in the US for lots of reasons. But until then, our process development and manufacturing will likely have to happen with partners in other continents, most likely Europe.
Terrific. So I see from the other speakers that are starting to queue up for the next panel that our time is coming to an end. So really terrific insights.
Before we close, John, I got a couple of things.
Yeah.
So James, you said you had lab space on Canal Street.
We do, yeah.
Where is that located?
That's the J&J Innovation Center.
Oh, okay. So that's J Labs. All right. I was
That's J Labs.
thinking, where are their lab space on Canal Street? Okay. And then one last comment from a member of the audience, Richard Robbins. He says, since the panelists are talking about recruiting talent in New York City, I want to plug the Lifecy NYC Internship program started by NYC EDC that my company runs. We recruit college grad students from all NYC universities and beyond and screen candidates to make it really easy for companies to find great talent. Nearly 50% of our interns have gotten offers to continue working at their companies. And best of all, as an NYC program, there is no cost for companies apart from paying interns. Feel free to email me if you're interested. And so his email is in the chat box there if any of you want to take a look. But thank you everybody for participating.
Yeah, thank you very much to the panelists. A really terrific insight, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. And so Nancy, we'll turn it back over to you for the next event.